Well, hello there. In this video, I want to talk about the dimensions. That's right, we're getting pretty far out. Um, uh, but I want to talk about them in a way where they're explained in terms of life experience, because oftentimes we hear about them in a material perspective, kind of like, and that's confusing to me. So we're just going to explain dimensions 1 through 5, okay, in terms of life experience. All right, so in life, there's people and things happen. And sometimes those things that happen are favorable for people, and sometimes they're not favorable for people that happen. Sometimes people can make things happen, and those things are favorable, and sometimes they're not. So that's pretty much life. People, things happening. Okay, so we're going to look at the dimensions in terms of that. Okay, so the first dimension is potential. Okay, anything that has potential to happening, any one thing that has the potential to happen, that's the first dimension. Hasn't happened, could happen. That's the first dimension. All right, so like on the material level for you, that sperm was your potential for life. That was you. That was the first dimension. And then when the sperm that was you beat out all the other ones and hit that egg, boom, that was your life, right? So that's it. Potential. Anything. Any one thing that could happen. First dimension. Okay, so when you met that egg, you answered the call for life, you graduated, you mastered the first dimension, and you ascended into the second dimension. Okay, the second dimension. Now, the second dimension is based on our programming. We grew up as children, and our minds qualified everything that we experienced. And depending on how that made us feel, those experiences and those objects that brought about those experiences and those feelings, the mind qualifies those as good or bad. It's two dimensions. And then as we grow up and we get older, anytime that we are qualifying anything that has happened or could happen in the mind, that's second dimension. Okay? So, whereas in the first dimension we see something, the first dimension is any one thing that could happen. And then the second dimension is how we qualify what could happen or what has happened. And it's only going to be qualified as good or bad. Okay, that's the second dimension. The second dimension kind of is where misery is created for people, because sometimes things happen in life and they don't create a pleasant result. Okay, we can't always control that, but it's like this programming, this qualifying programming, like that got carried with us from childhood into adulthood. It's just running. And say something happens, my son is sick, I see my son, I have the potential to get sick. I get sick. And then my mind starts qualifying this thing that happened. I don't want to get sick. Sick is bad. I'm sick. I don't like being sick. This is bad. Why did this happen to me? I don't like this. And then it just keeps running. See, this qualifying programming keeps running, okay? So feeling the unpleasantness in my body, in addition to the programming creating more unpleasantness for myself, the second dimension is where pretty much all the misery is created for everybody, right? Because when things aren't the way the mind says they should be, and then it happens, and then we qualify it as bad, and then that's bad, and then you're stuck in a situation that's just bad, and you can't get out. So the second dimension's it's pretty limited. So how do we graduate, master the second dimension, and graduate into the third dimension. Okay. Well, we have to kind of use the third dimension to graduate into it. Okay. And we got 3 ways to do that. So, all this qualifying programming is what we brought with us when we were learning growing up. Okay. So, you have to either uninstall the old programming, which means that you have to look at and put yourself in situations where you're forced to look at the beliefs that come up and say, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. So you have to look at those, be in situations where those come up and you can see them. Oh, this is just faulty programming. And you have to actively uninstall it, so to speak, or you have to actively be reinstalling or installing new programming. Okay. So that's like, you know, um, surrounding yourself with positive messages, um, believing that you can do things, you know, stuff like that, affirmations. So that's one way. The third way, so you got uninstalling old programming, installing new programming, or this is where the third dimension really comes into play in terms of us using it to get into the third dimension, is practicing being in the present moment, practicing observing whatever is happening in the present moment. Because the first dimension is not really like in like space and time, and the second dimension is not in space and time. It's basically catalog responses towards things that could happen or have happened, and if it happened, it's gone, right? So the third dimension is where we actually enter into the present moment, which is where life is happening, right? So you can use those 3 ways to gain mastery over the second dimension, so you can enter into the third dimension, which is the present moment. That's the third dimension. So now, practicing being in the present moment helps you establish a base for when you actually get into the present moment. But until you attain sufficient mastery over the second dimension, in terms of the truth as it is for you, until you remove all that old programming, or you remove all that old programming enough to actually be able to reside naturally in the third dimension, takes a lot of work. And so practicing being in the present moment helps create an excellent base for that, right? But you have to look at the old programming and you have to be deleting it, so to speak. So say you've mastered your old programming enough to where you are good enough and things are okay, even if situations are bad or situations are good. Like, right? Like you've gotten away from that qualifying programming enough to where you're able to reside in the third dimension for periods, then you start to see what can happen in the third dimension. Okay? The third dimension is based on the present moment. The second dimension is based on perception and knowledge. The first dimension is based on potential. Okay, so the third dimension in the present moment, what can we do? Well, we can be aware of the moment now. We enter into real life. Okay, we can visualize and hold and think about something that it is we want to create in our life, and then we can go and create it. We can go put out the effort to go and create whatever it is that is wanted. Depending on the degree of mastery in the second dimension that we have attained will affect what it is we create in the third dimension. Sometimes if we haven't mastered the second dimension enough, we might create something that is negative. Like if we've attained a sufficient degree of mastery, we can create something that is positive, right? It's based on love and acceptance of self, others, and world. Okay, so that's the third dimension. And then being able to consciously, the first part, consciously know what it is we want to create and then go create it. That's the third dimension. Now, the third dimension is a special dimension, okay? The third dimension is a powerful dimension, and the more able we are to be at peace with us, ourselves, others, and the world, we can skip the fourth dimension and go directly to the fifth dimension, okay? We don't need to go to the fourth dimension. The third dimension is really powerful. It will take us directly to the fifth once we've mastered being okay enough, being happy, just the way things are, right? Enough. So, and this is where the math of this model compared to the actual mathematical dimensional model starts to correlate, because we see that dimensions 1, 3, and 5 are connected, and 2 and 4 are connected, right? So now the fourth dimension, we'll get back to this, I'm just segueing. The fourth dimension is the dimension of visualization. The fifth, or manifestation, and the fifth dimension is the psychic dimension, okay? So we see in the first dimension, something could happen. In the third dimension, we're watching it happen as it is happening in the present moment. In the fifth dimension, the psychic dimension, we see, or we have gained access to insight and knowledge of something that is going to happen before it happens. You see? So those 1, 3, and 5 are connected. Now, 2 and 4 are connected also, because in the second dimension, we know what's good for us. We know what we like and we know what we don't like, okay? And in the fourth dimension, right, which is the dimension of manifestation, we are in the present moment, okay, know what we want, okay, working towards getting that by putting out only mental energy. We're sending out a mental request for something to be brought into our lives. That's the fourth dimension, okay, the dimension of manifestation. Like, and you might think, well, creating something out of nothing only with the power of my mind might be higher than psychic dimension. Why is it the fourth dimension? Why is the fifth dimension, the psychic dimension, higher? Because your needs are important, but your well-being based upon your needs or based upon attaining or having some object is actually kind of limited compared to not needing anything. It's sending out, whereas the psychic dimension is receiving. And when we're receiving in the fifth dimension, the psychic dimension, we're receiving knowledge of something that is going to happen that hasn't yet happened. We've totally exceeded time. Whereas in the third dimension, things are happening presently in this moment. We're seeing them happen. It's happening. This has just happened. It happens. It's happening. The fifth dimension, when you receive that, this is going to happen. And it's not like I'm sending out for this to happen, like in the fourth dimension. This is going to happen, and then it happens, right? So you've accessed infinite time, multi-layered infinite time, right? So we see that, and it's based on you not needing anything. It's based on everything from the third dimension being good. I, others, and the world is good. Okay, so I have found in the second dimension, I have found for me that when I remain with the truth as it pertains to me and myself, my beliefs, my opinions, my thoughts, myself, my feelings, when I remain with my truth and I don't try to be anybody else, I master the second dimension. No matter how much I have left of the old programming that I need to get rid of, I can ascend into the third dimension easily. And then when I remain true to myself in the third dimension and I remain happy, I find that I can access the fifth dimension really easy, much easier than, trying to consciously train psychic abilities or whatever. I just find that it naturally goes there. In the fourth dimension, accessing the fourth dimension, I have found you have to be in the third dimension to access the fourth dimension. So it goes 1, 3, 5, 2, 3, 4. That's kind of how it goes. I found that the more I am sending out a request to benefit others around me, that I have a more powerful effect in the fourth dimension than I would if I was requesting something for myself, like to win the lottery. I don't think the fourth dimension is necessarily discriminatory between something that benefits me directly or benefits others. But in my own personal experience, when I have sent out requests for the people around me over myself, I have seen the returns in the fourth dimension much more greater. Um, and like I said, in the fifth dimension, just being happy with who I am and not trying to change anything about me and not trying to change anybody else, not trying to change anything, just accepting self, others, and world joyfully, because these situations, some of them are pleasant, some of them are not so pleasant. We can't control that. But the more we're at peace with what is, the more we're choosing joy, right? Then we can access those higher dimensions of being and experience. All right. So this is attempt one. We'll see how it went. Pretty long, but it's a good video. All right. Peace, guys. Hey, ascend to those higher dimensions of consciousness and life experience.